Hi, Matt Sinclair. Today I want to talk to you about variety. It's the spice of life, they say, and economists, despite our dismal reputation, have been able to analyse the contribution it makes to our well-being. I think it's important in understanding the value of creativity and therefore the creative industries. And I wanted to just kind of step through why today and why I think the topic warrants more attention when we think about impacts within the creative industries. So before we get stuck in, just a quick note on what I mean, let's define our terms and what I mean by the creative industries. So here I'm going to stick to the pretty broad definition used by the UK Government Department, DCMS. We've gone through a few name and scope changes of that department in the last few years, but it's always been DCMS as an acronym. Crucially, when they look at this problem, they include in the creative industries both people working at creative businesses. If you're working for a TV production company, or you're an author, but it also includes people working in creative roles in other organisations. So if you are doing a creative job but you work for an accountancy, you are still a creative. It also, I think, includes more technology-facing roles. I think a lot of people have in mind because it's speaking to those who essentially are creating IP. It's people who are through their creative talents are creating intellectual property, which then has economic value. I think this is important because that I think speaks to where we should look for the most meaningful impacts of creativity and the creative industries, indeed individual creative sectors and businesses. It will be around the value of that IP, whether it's great technology or great stories. The economic impact of the creative industries is in the distinctive value of that IP, and it's the distinctive qualities of creations of the mind that can be, so for example, they can often be replicated at zero or near zero costs. They can stimulate other ideas. They can enhance other goods and services. Think about the design on your T-shirt, the branding on your coffee mug, and that means it will have different economic impacts to many physical goods or other services, and we might not want to use the same analytical toolkit. So just moving on, what do I mean by economic impact? It may not be a term you've come across very often. In practical terms, it's a topic that many organizations seek to understand. They want to understand, articulate, and if they can, quantify the value that their organization creates and its role in the wider economy. That might be so they can make decisions that will maximize those wider impacts. It might be so they can communicate with stakeholders the value that they're creating for each other. To give an example, this graphic's from a recent BBC report doing just that. It's an example of the most commonly measured kind of economic impacts, the impacts in the supply chain. Basically, this is asking what resources are employed in delivering BBC services, and to what extent do they sit within the BBC. So if you look at that chart, direct GVA, so that's not that's normally wages and profits. In the case of the BBC, which is obviously non-profit, it will basically be wages. So that will be equivalent to value added within the organisation. Then there's the indirect GVA, which is the value created in the wider network of suppliers that allows the BBC to provide you and me with services. There is a third category on this chart, induced impacts. It's a bit of a funny one. It's essentially the demand created when the factors of production, so that's the people working there and the capital invested in both the direct organisation itself and its supply chain, spend the money that they've earned due to those direct and indirect impacts. And that's that money, whether they're going down to the local sandwich shop off to buy a shirt or whatever, that money is that activity, therefore drives further economic activity. Now, I think my answer would be that it's normally best practice not to include that kind of impact in national studies, but to include it once you get down to local estimates. But it's pretty standard for this kind of study. It's pretty fine so long as you're clear on what the split is, what you're covering. But IP is a big deal again. Remember, this is distinctive. Ideas can be replicated, they can travel with an ease and a flexibility that's not true of physical goods. And I think that means there's additional economic impacts that aren't captured in that analysis of the supply chain. So firstly, the first common version of this is common stories and characters and worlds. So I've talked about the graphic on the left in an earlier video, which I'll try and link, which that's a graphic of reviews of the Witcher video game, which is a decent proxy for sales of the video game. And you can see, as I mentioned before, a transformative impact when the TV series first releases. And it's crucial to say there's a virtuous cycle here. Each medium, whether that's books, games, TV, etc., etc., firstly, they stimulate demand for each other, but also they provide characters, stories that the others can draw upon. They're supporting each other within this sort of franchise that people love. But there's also shared technology. So technology developed for one use case that can support other creative endeavors. A very famous recent example of this is the use of the Unreal Engine, which is principally created for video games, but now finding all sorts of use cases, being used in creation of the Mandalorian TV series. All of this reflects value for consumers and opportunities for other businesses. And I think it tells a story that is additional to, and in some ways more distinctive, alongside those supply chain impacts. But if we focus on consumer benefits, I think we can take this a stage further. Because when industries are healthy and creative, they'll tend to have more product variety. There's always likely to be something on TV. We think a decade or so back when it was a handful of terrestrial channels, there was something on TV. But the modern healthy TV sector has a variety of programs that comes from a diverse production ecosystem. And it may not be that any one program is more popular than the peak BBC program of the 70s or 80s, but people value that variety. The same way most countries have restaurants or consumer industries. It's very rare, in consumer industries like alcoholic drinks. But there's a huge difference between an industry reduced to a few survivors, serving the market but not doing much more, and a healthy, diverse market. The extreme example here would be Eastern Europe under communism. What you hear again and again in tales of those times is about the blandness and uniformity of what was on offer. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's just a search for the best individual product. So think about food, for example, and how that's changed, over the last century, right? Fish and chips is great, but having a choice of fish and chips or a curry or a Chinese or a decent pizza or having a choice of a few different pizza places is better. It's having that rich range, having a not just generic beer, but a rich range of craft beers and lagers and all that is better. Being able to experience all kinds of different TV coming from different cultures even is better. And so I think crucially, this is a value we can see in the numbers. So the love of variety is a topic that really starts in the trade sector, work by Krugman, as it says here. So these are a couple of clips from a New York Fed study a while back, and it tried to estimate how much variety games had improved consumer welfare in the US as it steadily opened up to trade from the 1970s. And it's an amazing headline finding that I've highlighted there, that those welfare gains are worth 2.8% of GDP. Now, just to put that in context, that is a very large number. So 2.8% of GDP in 2021, for example, will be over $600 billion. These are massive impacts. And crucially, we can even ask where those gains are coming from. So in this macro study, you can see this on the right, they estimated which countries were contributing to growing variety, trade with which countries was contributing to growing variety the most. I could be wrong, but I don't see why it shouldn't be possible to do a micro version of this kind of analysis. Estimate the value of the diversity in the sector, the contribution that a given segment or company has brought to that diversity, or perhaps the impact of a network organization, a platform organization in enabling greater diversity. And I think in a world where people don't necessarily want to hear companies shouting, we're the biggest. It's be kind of refreshing to be asking, how do we enrich the economy, enrich people's lives by bringing more variety to the market? So to step back quickly, I think this matters because it can improve our understanding of the creative economies, why and how creativity matters. Variety is always going to be intimately linked to creativity, putting different inputs together in different ways in order to create something new and different to what's already in the market. I think fundamentally, if we reflect the value that consumers put on diversity in a sector, that should help people be more thoughtful about all kinds of decisions. I think it gives a sense of the value of advertising, for example. Sometimes people talk down the idea of just bringing another beer brand to market. I think that's because they aren't taking that love of variety seriously enough as part of what people want from the world. In terms of corporate strategy, when you're looking to build networks, I think it's important to bear in mind, there's always a risk that optimizing will push decisions towards an overly homogenous right answer versus providing that diversity that people find really satisfying. And finally, in terms of public policy, sometimes variety is going to be more sensitive than the overall scale of a sector to decision making. If regulatory costs, for example, make it harder for new or smaller organizations to bring goods to market, then that's going to have a disproportionate impact on the consumer experience because it might not just because it might affect the variety of goods on offer more than it seems to affect the scale that's on offer. So I hope you found that interesting. If you liked it, please do like, subscribe. I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you soon.